You're listening to
and such a short amount of time to do it in. We were really
a Mamamia podcast.
From Mamamia, you're listening to No Filter, a podcast where people from all walks of life tell their stories very candidly and aren't afraid to be vulnerable. My name is Mia Friedman. Rebecca Woolf has done a lot of things earlier than most of her peers. She became a mum at 23. She had 4 children by the time she was 29, including twins. And she became a widow at just 37 when her husband Hal died pretty suddenly. But before he got sick, Rebecca was planning to leave him.
You know, we would avoid each other. There was no sex. All the things that happen in a marriage when it's clearly ready to end. It was just, there were financial issues. I wanted out. He, I think, maybe thought that we could work things out that to me were very obvious that we couldn't.
I followed Rebecca for years, ever since I discovered her blog that was called Girls Gone Child. It was back when blogging was a thing, I think probably around 2011, 2012. And she used to write about her family life and struggling with her identity as a young woman in her 20s who was also a mother and a wife. And it was all the stuff that's so familiar to anyone who's had a baby or been in a long-term relationship or maybe wondered who they were meant to be in their 20s and 30s. And I think the reason her work resonated with me so much is because Rebecca speaks about the hard stuff, like exploring her sexuality and open relationships and so much other stuff that's uncomfortable or even taboo to talk about. Stuff that we don't often allow ourselves to talk about or even feel. Here is my conversation with Rebecca Woolf. Rebecca, you became a young mother. Your blog was originally called Girl Gone Child, and your book was subtitled From Wild to Child. How did you manage your identity as a young woman with what you felt was expected of you as a mother?
I think it was really empowering for me to be a young mother because I didn't know any better but to do what I was doing. So I think the sort of beauty of having no experience is that you don't know, you're not set in your ways. So I think for me, being a young mother, and this is sort of now, 16 years later, it's no longer a young mother, but I recognize that there were so many advantages of having a child and not knowing what the hell I was doing because I never really felt like I needed to. I was learning as I went, which to me is what parenting is all about. Like you're always learning as you go, but I didn't have any expectations from really myself or from anyone else. And I think that was really liberating actually to be a young mom and not to put any pressure on myself to really be anything other than what I was, which was also sort of a kid figuring it out.
Did you expect to have 4 kids?
No. No. I still am in shock. I still don't understand it. I commented the other day on someone who had 4 kids and I was like, God, I forget that I have 4 kids too. So I'll be like, God, that's a lot of kids. How are they able to? And I'm like, I'm still in shock. When I found out I was pregnant with twins, my 3rd pregnancy was twins. I had a full panic attack, breathing into the bag, shock, and I'm still recovered. I still am in shock. They're 10. They're about to be 10, and I'm still in shock about the pregnancy.
When you were 37, you just turned 40.
Mm-hmm.
When you were 37, you became a widow. You did something else young that people don't expect you to do at that age. Hal died quite quickly. He was diagnosed with cancer and he died just a few months later.
Mm-hmm.
You've written about how you'd been preparing to end the marriage before he got sick. What was that period like?
Really, really complicated. So we had been basically preparing to split up our entire marriage. We had gone through highs and lows, good times, bad times, but it was very clear, I think, for both of us early on that it was not a sustainable situation. So in the 2 years before he was diagnosed, it was pretty much over. we would avoid each other. There was no sex, all the things that happen in a marriage when it's clearly ready to end. It was just, there were financial issues. I wanted out. He, I think, maybe thought that we could work things out that to me were very obvious that we couldn't work out. He was very angry. He was emotionally abusive. There was a lot going on that even I am only sort of starting to figure out, he's been dead for 3 years and I'm now oh shit, this is how this was. When you're on the other end of something, and you look at it retrospectively, you're like, oh my God, how did I even live like this? I can't even wrap my head around it. So yeah, we were in a horrible place. I mean, we weren't even speaking. When he said he had stomach pains, I literally was in my head, good, fuck you. I felt no empathy for him. It had gotten to the point where I had hatred in my heart for him, by the time he was diagnosed. So he had a stomach ache. He basically was I need to go to the ER. He had gone to the doctor twice in that week. They're blood tests were fine. Everything was fine. He was I need to go to the ER. This is not fine. And I, because of where we were, was I'm not going to take you. He was a hypochondriac anyway. Everything, he was always dying. Something was always going wrong. He was always in pain. Everything was always horrible. He was always going to die. Everything was the worst at all times with him. So I was done. I was you know what? I'm not going to pacify you anymore. You're not feeling well. You go get an Uber, go to the hospital. I'm staying home with the kids. I can't. I couldn't. I was so done that even the fact that he was in excruciating pain, I was I can't. So he went and called me from the ER. By the time they had actually started doing scans, it was 4 a.m. So he called me basically at 4 a.m. and said, I'm dying. I have stage 4 pancreatic cancer. It's in my liver. It's in my lymph nodes. This is it. Oh. And I remember thinking at the time in my head, I was I did this. I must be a witch. This is totally on me. I've been wanting out for so long. I felt I didn't know how to. And in my head, and I wrote about this in my book too, but this was something that I'm still grappling with. I was so done. There were so many things that I had thought and felt. And when he said that, I felt it was my fault. Obviously it wasn't. He had cancer for what the doctors think was 10 years. We had no idea. Wow. But in my head, I felt I had something to do with it. And I think a lot of that now, thinking back, had to do with our marriage and how everything was my fault all the time. I think I was oh, something's wrong with you. It's my fault. Yeah. I had internalized that for so many years that his illness, immediately my response was, I must have done something wrong. So it was very intense. Obviously, I went straight to the hospital. I went, fishing for my wedding ring, which I hadn't worn in 2 years. And I went to go be with him. And I did not leave his side until he died 4 months later. I was everything that I knew he needed me to be while he was dying. I advocated for him. I slept in his hospital room every night. I didn't leave him alone. I, wiped his ass. I bathed him. I was his caretaker. I was his hospice nurse. I did all of it. Obviously, that is a whole other layer of it, right? Because you're I can't stand this person. I don't want anything to do with this person. I'm so done. And suddenly you're their death doula. You have to go into this other place in my body where I went, there was love here once before. I have to access sort of this other part of myself who does love him, who does want to take care of him, who does want the best for him. I kind of went into this, mother place with him. And, I have no regrets. Those last 4 months, I did it. I learned so much about myself, about what I wanted, what it means to be in a marriage, in a relationship, in a body, in an experience as a mother. He was still my children's father. There were all sorts of ways for me to figure out how to be what he needed. I was not a priority, obviously.
Did you feel trapped? When he made that phone call from the hospital, obviously it was a big shock. And in those months, did you feel like you'd been about to get in your getaway car and leave this marriage and someone had locked the doors and you were stuck?
Yes. I also felt we had finally said, this is it. I'm done. I'm leaving. I had finally actively started looking for places to move. I think now I feel more this way. I was finally going to do this. I was finally going to get out of this marriage. And it was very passive the way it ended, right? Like I had no control over it. So now I had to spend, the months after he died, I had to be a widow when I felt like a divorcee. I don't know if you've been following what I've been doing for the last few weeks, but that has come from this sort of need for me to like have closure in a way that I never had closure, and then people are coming at you like, you lost the love of your life. I'm so sorry. Like they had empathy for me, which I was so grateful for, but they didn't know how complicated it was. My close friends knew. They obviously knew where we were. They knew our relationship. They were completely understanding. And I think that's why my circle, my people became my lifeline, because they understood. And I had this whole public rallying around me, which I was so grateful for, but they were rallying around this version of me that wasn't me. And I felt so ashamed that I had all these feelings of relief, that I was like, I'm finally out of this marriage. And by the way, I knew he was going to die quickly. Even though he was in denial, he did not think he was going to die. Up until the very end, he did not think he was going to die. But I knew he was going to die, and I saw the prognosis. I knew what was happening to his body. So I was able to take care of him knowing that there was an end date. If I didn't know how long I'd be taking care, there's no way I would have been able to do that. There's no way. And I know women who are doing that right now because I've talked to them. And I cannot even wrap my head around what that must be like to take care of somebody who's terminally ill, chronically ill, that you either don't love anymore, who you are in an abusive relationship with. It's like there's so much there. And we, especially as women, caretaking is like our superpower. So we know how to like forget who we are in lieu of everyone else. And I was able to do that for 4 months. I would have lost it for longer than that. And I don't know how people do that for longer. I have so much like empathy for that experience. It was only 4 months for me.
The fact that you felt that way, but your children obviously felt very differently. They weren't preparing to leave their father, and that was not something that they would have chosen to have happened. I guess there wasn't relief in there for them, was there? Did it make it harder or easier for you to navigate their grief, given that yours was different?
My grief is very complicated. Theirs was far easier for me to navigate. And I think because of that, because I was all about them. His funeral, like his burial, his grave, they were so involved in all of that. And that was such a relief for me because I didn't feel like it was my place, honestly. Like even when I became his POA, his power of attorney, the night I went in, I was like, are you sure? And he was like, yes. And I remember thinking like, God, if the roles were reversed, I would, not. But we were very different people and our strengths were very different. And he knew that I would be able to like come in and do what needed to be done. And that this was like what I did. Being able to like guide them through it was such a relief, I think, for me, because I didn't have to really sit with my own feelings. It's probably like a really unhealthy thing to say, but it's true. And, children are so resilient. My kids, obviously, this is incredibly hard for them, but they were so amazing throughout everything. And, they had a complicated relationship with him too. He was their father, but he was not an easy person for any of us. So they felt similarly to me. And we talked about that because it was important for us to talk about, you can love somebody and miss them and obviously not want them to die, but also feel like, oh, wait, our house is so much calmer now. We don't have to walk on eggshells. There's not somebody that's going to start screaming, Our house is a completely different house now. And that has been positive in a lot of ways. And that's heartbreaking to say, but I also feel like it's important to acknowledge that like when we experience a traumatic event, the trauma that comes out of that isn't necessarily the traumatic event. It's also reconciling with the trauma that person instilled on you when they were alive. We don't really talk about that. And that is something that I feel we really need to, because I think there's a lot of women, there's a lot of families who, who lose a spouse, who lose a father, who lose a parent that they loved, but was extremely toxic. And when they're gone, you grieve them, but you also grieve the experience you had with them that was hard.
I've heard that a lot when people have lost parents. That's so true. And from the outside, you're sort of like, why are you so upset? This person was awful to you, or you didn't even like them, or you were estranged for them. But that makes perfect sense. You're grieving the trauma, or you're processing the trauma of your lived relationship with them as well as their death.
Yes. So much was triggered. Like in the last few years, so much has come up, I think, for all of us, where I've had to really like go inside myself too and think like, God, I was like an enabler. I was passive. Like there were so many things that I did in my marriage that were so unhealthy. There's so much that I'm still working through. And the death, you grieve a death, everything else, that's the stuff. That's where it gets really complicated. Isn't the death, it's everything else. It's the life, it's your feelings. It's like, and also allowing ourselves to have the tangle of feelings. You can love someone and also be super relieved that they're no longer in your life. You can miss somebody and also be so grateful that you don't have to fucking deal with them. All of that is so healthy and normal and natural to feel. And, I don't think we certainly don't allow ourselves to talk about it. But I think for a lot of us, we don't even allow ourselves to feel those things. We like cut it off, because we feel guilty. I can't feel that way. He's dead. The worst thing that could have possibly happened to him happened to him. And so because of that, we think like all is forgiven, right? Because that's it. The worst thing that can happen to you is death. But it's completely valid to be angry. It's completely valid to recognize that this person hurt you, that you had no closure on all sorts of things, because that's another part of this too, is you don't have closure.
Well, I was going to ask you, in those 4 months, you said that you did everything for him that he needed you to do. Did you also say things that you didn't mean because he needed to hear them?
No, I don't feel like I ever said anything I didn't mean. I felt like I really, truly felt all the things that I expressed to him. I know that he said a lot of things he didn't mean. It was really hard because he was really angry. He was always angry, but he was really, some people, especially when they're dying, it's like it either pulls you this way or this way. And for him, it was like there was a lot of anger. There was a refusal to do all the things that needed to be done, financial things.
I'm so sorry that you had to go through all of that. I really am.
Thank you.
I'm Mia Friedman, and you're listening to No Filter with Rebecca Woolf. So you became a widow at 37, and then the next chapter of your life began and is continuing. And you wrote at the time, or you've wrote since, when my husband died, I vowed to stay single in my afterlife, not because I was grieving, but because domestic partnership was something I had no interest in doing again. How did that work out?
I think, first of all, I never really believed in marriage, never believed in monogamy. I knew that when this marriage was over, I would live my life in a very different way. As soon as, the sort of dust had settled and I was back in my body, which happened, I think, very quickly for me, I was ready. Like, I was dating months after he died, but I would have dated weeks after he died if I didn't feel guilty for that. Even the months felt guilty, but I think I was at a point where I was like, this is ridiculous. I haven't had sex in 2 years. Like, I'm a human being. I'm in this very different place that, anyway, I kind of dove right into dating and became very clear with the people that I was dating what was going on in my life. I'm a widow with 4 kids. I am here kind of for one thing. Was very unapologetic about it. And I had a year of really wonderful, casual experiences. Fabulous. Fell in love in there. We had almost a year-long relationship still while keeping it open, which was very, that was a priority for me, was to keep the relationship open. And then we broke up for a lot of different reasons. And then, I think a lot of my want to not ever get married again, not ever have a domestic partner, has to do with the trauma from my marriage. Nope, I did that. I'm done. I also think a lot of that has to do with, I feel very protective of my children. And I feel very strongly that I can serve the role that both parents serve. And a lot of people disagree with me. A lot of people think that children need a father figure, children need 2 parents, children, I feel like I was always sort of 2 parents. Parenting 4 kids alone is easier than parenting it with somebody that I had a, hard relationship with. So I actually feel like as a parent, I am the best version of myself as a parent doing it by myself. And I feel very protective of our family of 5 now, because we're really good together. Like, we have a really good thing going, and I don't want to disturb that by bringing another person into my home.
Yeah.
So I keep the relationships outside the home. I've been with someone for almost a year now. He's never met my kids.
I want to ask you about sex and sexuality in a second, but you've written about how there's this idea that a single mother will want to find her person after losing her partner, and that the idea of being single is ultimately to find your person, and that's what every single person is trying to do. But you said that conventional heterosexual relationships don't actually benefit single women. You wrote, "Women are tapped out. We do not have the energy to support the emotional demands of husbands, especially when we are doing the bulk of the domestic labour, not to mention holding down jobs."
I have sort of a women and children first philosophy when it comes to everything. So my priority is always going to be my children and myself over a partner at this point specifically. Like, when my kids are out of the house, I know that could change. But it was the same way in my marriage, which I think was hard on Hal, because my children they were always going to be first. In my experience in relationships, we all need a lot. But we're only able to do so much. And in order to have a career, raise 4 children, I can't be the kind of partner that a lot, not all, but a lot specifically of cis het men expect and demand, frankly. And the emotional labor of relationships with cis het men is immense. And if you're juggling work and children, it's going to just become this whole conflict unless you're super clear on where your priorities are. And I think that's what I've learned in the last 3 years is, like, what are the relationships that are going to work for me as a single solo parent? I don't have breaks. Like, I'm with my kids all the time. They don't go to anyone else's house. They live here. They don't have a second parent. How can I have relationships with people that are relationships, that are loving, that are bonding, that are, all of the things that a strong, stable relationship are? Can I have that outside my home? Can I keep my life separate, my domestic life separate from my intimate life? And what I've learned is that, yes, I can. And that for me, it's so much healthier because I get to be home with my children, their mother, and my work. I get to be my work. And then with my person, I can be the person. Like, we put all of our roles in one place and we're like working with kids and husbands, and it's too much. It's unsustainable. So I've sort of, with trial and error, figured out that by keeping things separate, by keeping lovers separate from family, I'm a better mother, I'm a better partner, I'm a better all of these things because I can be present with everybody.
How have you changed sexually over the last 3 years? What have you learned about your sexuality?
I think that so much of my sexuality before my marriage, in my marriage, was about pleasing everybody else, was about this male gaze, pleasure, everyone else's pleasure, putting that before my own, like taking pride in like what my performance was before like how I felt. Can
you explain that?
I remember like priding myself in my early 20s. Like, I know that I can give like a solid blowjob. Like, I can
I'm good at this.
Yeah. If you were to have asked me what felt good to me, I couldn't have even answered you. I was so fixated on knowing how to please everyone else and like figuring it out, like being with someone and asking and figuring it out, and like being so focused on making sure that like, what are you into? Right. I would ask people who they're into, and I would do things all the time that I didn't even enjoy because for me, I was there to please, and like, what was I doing? So even like having like experiences with women, which I had, previously, but it was all male gaze. It was like, how can I turn on this guy that I'm with? Everything that I was doing was for the pleasure and purpose of pleasing a man. And it's super interesting because right after Hal died, I had this like permanent period. Like I was bleeding. I called it my morning period, but I bled the entire time he was dying. Like maybe like 2 days of the month I wasn't bleeding, but I was bleeding the whole time. And then after he died, just bleeding. Like,
wow.
I had a copper IUD, so I think it was just at the end of its life and it had gotten, but it was also, they have always been like this. It was a response. It was like, I have gone to war and I'm literally, this is so me to be like, I'm fine. Everything's fine as I bleed out. That is how I was when he was dying. It was like just making sure everyone else is okay. And here I was, like my guts were literally coming out of my body. So it felt like profound and like poetic to have this, you know, physical reaction. But what also happened is all the people I had sex with and like the months after Hal died, I bled all fucking over them.
Hi, nice to meet you.
It's never in my house, right? I can't bring anyone home here. So I'm literally bleeding over everyone sheets all over Los Angeles. And like in the past, that would have been mortifying to me. So it was so fucking empowering to be like, yes, here it is. You're going to like it. I don't even care because it doesn't bother me. I don't care. And it was actually like changed my life. It really had, because it was the first time where I was like thinking about how I felt and I was thinking about my pleasure and I was thinking about my body and I was like, this is my body. Like, this is what it does. And I've done all sorts of things with male bodies and now here's my body doing what it does. And if you don't want to hit this, that's fine. Here it is.
Yeah. Just unapologetic.
Unapologetic. And it felt very profound for me. And it was sort of like, you know, facing a fear because after that, it was like, everything was different after that.
You said the first time that you slept with a woman without a man present in this period was quite life-changing and profound for you. What did you learn?
Well, especially because I had actually fallen in love with someone. So the first time I had like actual sex with a woman, it was like we loved each other. Like we had fully bonded and it was like a whole situation. And it was for both of us the first time we had ever been with another woman without a man present, like not a threesome situation. And we both had the same sort of history, right? Where we had spent years of our lives like performing, pleasuring everyone else, not prioritizing ourselves. So it was like you have these two people that have had the same sort of experiences, the same kinds of marriage. We both had the same kinds of marriages. We both had the same kinds of pre-marriage experiences coming together and having this like, holy shit, like I can't even explain it. It felt like, how did it take this long for me to get here? This is what it's supposed to be like. What? Like, how did I spend so many years thinking I needed to be this way? And it was both of us having this sort of same realization together, which was like really emotional and really intense and really like, whoa, this is it. It's really hard for me to explain.
Did it make you think, oh, I'm a lesbian? That's what's been missing all my life.
No, because I really do not feel like I'm gay. Like I feel like I'm very pansexual. I feel like I could be with any kind of body. It was specific to like being a woman and it was like recognizing a part of my femininity, but not even femininity. Do you ever have those dreams where there's like a new bedroom in your house? Do you ever have those dreams? This is like a recurring dream that I have where I'm like, oh my God, I have this huge room in my house. Like, how have I lived in this house for years and like not known that I have this room? What? I could have done so much with this room. That's what it felt like. It was like, oh my God, there's an entire fucking room in my house that I didn't know was there. And I could have done so much with this room. But instead I just ignored it or didn't see it or didn't know that it was there. And now it's here. And now like I'll never go back because there's this room. And now I know what it feels like to have this extra room. So it felt more like that to me. It wasn't like, oh, I'm with women. Never again will I be with a man. I'm with a man right now. But I think if I were to like settle down with someone years down the line, I think it would probably be a woman because I find that relationship to be, for lack of a better term, it feels very safe for me, and safe that the connection between women is very different than the connection between women and men. And like sexually, but also emotionally, experientially, like sometimes when we were together, we understood each other in a way that I'd never been understood before in a relationship.
It sounds so perfect. Why did it end?
So it didn't really end. She just lives on the other side of the country and is married and is in an open marriage. So, and this has sort of been my thing too. Like, what's beautiful to me about relationships for me at this point in my life is that they don't need to be anything other than what they are. This is an in the moment situation. We were very much like a moment. We're still very close. What happens with this in the future? Who knows? But we're still in a relationship for sure. But it was never about what we were going to be. It was only ever about what we were, what we are in the moment. And that's really what all my relationships have been like since Hal died. They've been like, this is in the moment. We're not making plans for the future. We're not trying to, they're relationships that stay in the moment. And I think something that I've also learned through going through the death is that the impermanence of everything, of life, of love, that it's okay for your feelings to fade, that it's okay for somebody to stop loving you, that it's okay for you to stop wanting X, Y, and Z with this person, that everything is temporary. And I sort of have had this sort of mantra, which is what I'm sort of working on as a secondary book right now, quietly, although I guess it's not quiet to talk to you about it. And that is, I'm prepared to lose you. And that for me has been sort of a through line in everything that I've thought about, relationship wise, with my children, with everything. That if I can be prepared to lose the people that I love, the people that I'm in relationships with, my children, and not like in death, but in going off to college. My son is going off to college in a couple of years. That's the whole thing that's frying my brain, because I'm very attached to my kids and him, he's my first, he's the only boy, there's a lot. And if I can prepare myself to lose my body, right? Because we get older and things start falling apart. If I can be prepared to lose my family, my parents, my grandparents, my dog, my mind, I can basically open myself up to anything. And that is what sort of these last 3 years have felt like. And that's what my relationships have felt like, is just a sort of like an acceptance for the impermanence of it all.
When you said, I'm still in a relationship with her, but then you also before said, I'm in a relationship with a man now. It sounds complicated.
So I haven't physically been with her in almost a year. We're more like very close friends who have like deep love for each other. But again, I don't think it's complicated. I think that we assume, and these are conversations I have when people talk about open relationships. It feels so complicated. We feel like we need to put labels on everything, right? Like we put labels on everything. And if you're to strip away all the labels, right? I don't have a boyfriend. I don't have a girlfriend, or I didn't have a girlfriend. Like these are just people that I have connections with, that I have experiences with. So I am with this person right now that I am very connected with. I love him. We have experiences together. Why? Why do we have to be anything other than that? I'm super happy. He's happy. We found something that sort of works for us. So it doesn't need to be complicated. And like, yes, there's communications, there's conversations. There are moments where like, I'm like, wait a minute, I love you. Like, shouldn't we be like, and then realizing, wait, but this is great. Like, why am I comparing it to these people who are now, So I think that it doesn't need to be complicated. It really doesn't. And I think she's super happy. She has an amazing husband who I love. He's great. So supportive, so wonderful. She's super happy. We have the relationship we have now, knowing that we had this relationship that we had that was really amazing. And we had this, this great small amount of time together in person, and we'll always have that. But it doesn't need to be anything other than what it is. Like nothing does.
It makes me really understand that concept of fluidity. Like it sounds really fluid, like relationships and people. And, for someone in a monogamous relationship, that sounds quite confronting and scary, because where are the guardrails? Like this person that you love, this guy, what if he's got someone else, and what if they're another woman, or what if they're another man, and what does that mean to you? Have you had to undo a lot of your sort of internalized thinking about that?
So I've never, and this has been an issue in relationships in the past, and now I realize that it's an advantage. And this was always something that I was punished for, but now I'm like, fuck you, you're the ones who have the problem, not me, because I don't feel jealous. If there's somebody I love and they're sleeping with someone else and people, they're like, there's no way, but it doesn't affect me the way I think it affects a lot of people. So I personally, the rules, those fuck me up in a relationship. Monogamy, you need to be with one person, you need to do X, you need to be this, you need to call this person this is the name, this is what you're supposed to do. That's the stuff that freaks me out. So the way maybe somebody would be confused about non-monogamy is how I feel about monogamy. Monogamy to me feels crazy. It doesn't fit with who I am. And I think that's because I am so fluid in all of the ways. And because sort of the impermanence of everything, that's what I get off on. I get off on the fact that I choose you now. You choose me now. That to me feels like so loving, to have the option to be with anyone you want to be with and you're choosing me. That's love for me. And that is how I feel with other people. Like, you're with me now, I'm honored, and then if you're going to be with someone else, like, go be with someone else. But I don't ever want to keep anyone from any experience ever, whether it's sexual in any way. So for me, that's my love language, is giving people, not even giving, but just being supportive of people doing what feels good to them and right to them, and not being offended by it or hurt by it or taking it personally. I don't really take a lot personally. I think that is like a personality thing, but I feel very like secure in who I am, and I feel like I'm really great. So if you want to be with someone else, like, I'm not going to feel like less of a person. Like, do you know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah.
I'm not going to keep you from your life. Like, I don't want to keep anyone from your life. And I think people feel safer in relationships, monogamous relationships, because we're afraid to lose, right? We're so afraid to lose. And it goes back to that concept of I'm prepared to lose you. If I'm in a non-monogamous relationship with someone and you meet someone and you fall in love with them, I'm ready for it. That's okay. I would never want someone to stay with me who didn't want to be with me. And after spending years in a marriage with someone who I didn't want to be married to, who I didn't want to be with, who I didn't love, I don't ever want anyone to feel that way, ever. Even if it's like we're dating for 6 months. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Rebecca, just finally, how have your kids adjusted to this new reclaiming of your identity that you've had since Hal died?
So my kids are amazing and supportive, and I think that I'm just like a boring mom. Like, there's nothing about me that they think is like anything. Like, they think that I'm basic, Like, I think we forget, like, this generation is so far advanced in terms of like being like socially evolved. Like, talk about fluidity, gender-wise, sexuality, all these things. Like, they're way ahead of me. I'm not doing anything or saying anything that's surprising to them at all.
That's so true. I hadn't thought of that. It's like, for them, you're not pushing the envelope. You're just being basic, which is what every kid thinks about their parent, right? Every teenager.
They like laugh. There are times where they're like, oh, mom, because I'll come home. I go out. They know where I'm going. They know what I'm doing. And they'll be like, nice face, because I'll have like, my hair will be all askew and I'll have like mascara here. And they'll bust my balls a little bit. But it's, it's more of like a, kind of ha-ha roll thing.
Mum's sleeping with women. She's so basic.
Well, that they think is basic because fluidity. I mean, we live in Los Angeles and my kids are like art school. So gender is, a construct to all of them. All of them feel that way. And sexuality, all these things. So I think probably the only thing that I've talked to them that's not as normalized is like non-monogamy and feeling, like I need to separate my relationships from them because I want them to know the people in my life. That feels a little bit tricky because I'm in this relationship with this person that I really love that they don't know. But, we talk about it and, at some point maybe they will know him and it doesn't need to be there. Again, like we don't need to have these rules on it. But in terms of like who I am, they understand that pretty much any question they can ask me, I'll answer. And there's a lot that they don't want to know, obviously, because I'm their mom. But, I have 2 kids who are teenagers, and, we talk about relationships all the time. We talk about healthy relationships and how different they are for everybody, and how it's so important to feel like you're doing what's good for you and not what everyone else has tried, not to conform to other people's standards, which they automatically they get that because of this sort of, the fluidity of our kids now. So it completely makes sense to them.
And because you're living by example. Yeah. Rebecca has written a book about her life. It's called All of This, a memoir of death and desire. And it's coming out in 2022, so keep an eye out and follow her on Instagram. We'll put a link in our show notes. Thank you for listening to this No Filter. And if you're looking to listen to something a little bit different, if you are not in your 20s and you want to know what the young people are doing and thinking, The Undone is a Mamamia podcast that explores everything from dating to friendship to social issues to sex. And this week, hosts Em and Lucy are talking about a new trend called hesidating, which I don't understand, but I will after I've listened to that episode. Take a listen.
I just think it's really important to remember that dating should be a treat, should be fun.
Dating's an expansion pack on an already very full package. That's how I like to think of it. Like, your friends, your family.
Wait, I'm like trying to think of it.
Think about The Sims. I always think about The Sims. You get the original game.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah.
You can make families. You can have like pets and stuff. You can build a house. And then you're like, I'm going to get an expansion pack. And it's like, oh, this is pretty cool. But I still have everything foundational. Like it's an expansion pack on something that was already good. Now it's just better.
And then you can have some woohoo time.
Woohoo!
The assistant producer of No Filter is Lucy Neville. The executive producer is Eliza Ratliff. I'm Mia Friedman. And if you want more of us in your life, come and visit the Mamamia app. And just by reading or listening to our content, just by listening to this podcast today, you are helping to fund girls in schools in some of the most disadvantaged countries in the world. Through our partnership with Room to Read, we're currently sending 300 girls to school every single day, and our aim is to get to 1,000 and then 10,000. Because at Mamamia, our core purpose is to make the world a better place for women and girls.
Mamamia acknowledges the traditional owners of the land we have recorded this podcast on, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures.